Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Jillian, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Yuri.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to start by asking how you describe yourself and what you do.
Okay. Well, I've gone through various different iterations, but fundamentally, when I'm dead, on my tombstone, I want writer.
Okay, excellent.
That's what I want, writer. Because I've worked a lot in PR and I'm also a journalist and I've done other things, marketing, and I do other things, but writer, just writer.
Just writer.
Writer, yeah.
In quotes, not in quotes?
Just in caps, I think. Very large. And preferably, it'd be nice to have a whole rake of books listed underneath it as well. So I better get writing a bit fast. I've only written, I've written about 6, but I need to write some proper ones.
Okay. Wonderful. All right, well, let's step back then. So writer. So you originally studied history and English. Why did you want to get into, or why did you choose to study that in your university?
Well, because interesting enough, I had originally wanted to become a primary school teacher, and you have to have honours Irish for that, and I wasn't very good at Irish, but I remember my father saying, well, apply to college as well. You don't just put all your eggs in one basket. And then I thought, well, what do I apply for in college? If I want to be a teacher, what else do I want to do? And my father said, well, what are your favourite subjects? So I thought, well, history and English. So that's why I applied. And it was the best advice I ever got in terms of choosing a course, because I had the 4 best years in Trinity. I mean, Trinity's a great college anyway. It's one of the oldest colleges in the world, Trinity College in Dublin. But I had an amazing time. It was just because I was studying things that I enjoyed. So it was just such a pleasure. It was brilliant.
Wonderful. Okay, so you went through, you're studying history and English. What did you do after you graduated?
Okay, well, even before I graduated, a lot of the time, banks and big companies would come into Trinity to do on the milk round. Before you graduate, they look to hire graduates. So one of the best parties that used to happen for one of these sort of talks was JP Morgan would come into Trinity. And they were very generous with the old budget, with the beer afterwards. So I went to a JP Morgan talk. I borrowed a suit of my mum, because I didn't have a suit, of course. And then really enjoyed it. Then afterwards I thought, well, I might apply to this bank. It sounds very nice. And I went through I had a standard application form. I didn't even have my own CV. And I went, sales and trading, a bit scary. Corporate finance, I know nothing about that. Then I went, systems. Oh, wow. I know nothing about computers. Let's apply there. And so I applied and I was hired on the milk round. Before I had my finals, I had a job offer from JP Morgan. So I moved to London.
That's wonderful. Wait, did you call it the milk round?
Yeah, it's a term when big companies come into colleges and they recruit students before they finish their finals. Huh. So it's like what they're saying is they really want you, basically. So it's actually, they're not actually waiting. I mean, they're presuming you'll get your degree anyway, but it's quite a coup to be hired on the milk round.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it. Okay, so you were hired by JP Morgan and moved to London. Great.
Yeah.
So what did you do? So how was your time at JP Morgan, and what did you do after that?
Well, I loved my 3 years there in London. I bought a flat with a girlfriend. So I lived in Islington, worked in the city. It was back in the 80s, the late 80s, so it was very relaxed. Like I remember at lunchtime on a Friday, our entire office would go to the pub and not come back. Doesn't happen anymore. But I thought, is this how people work? And of course, for the first 6 months, it was all training, induction programs and, outward bound courses and all the rest of it. So I had a great time. And then I met my then husband. I'm divorced now, so my story changes a bit. Sure. But I met my husband. He was working for the bank as well. Okay. And he got a transfer to Sydney. So we got engaged. I moved over to Australia. Moved to Sydney for 3 years. Got married in Fiji while we were out there, and I had a great time in Sydney. And then we moved to Singapore, and I had been working in high-tech PR at that stage, or fintech PR. And I was working with Hill & Knowlton, which is an American company. So I worked for them in Singapore. I ended up, I think I was their Asia Pac director for advanced technology, as it was called back in the day.
Yeah.
And I had my first child there as well. So I had that was towards the end of our stay over there for just under 2 years.
Okay.
And then I moved back to Ireland, and I brought my husband with me because he was English. And I bought a house before he came home, actually. I bought a house in Dublin, so he couldn't change his mind.
Yeah.
And we lived in Dublin for a couple of years, had my second child. I worked for Iona Technologies, Ireland's first software company to float on NASDAQ. Quite a big deal here. And then we moved down the country, bought a ruin, and bought this ruin, did it up with the idea of running a guest house. But we were a bit like, I always say, my ex-husband, well, he wasn't my ex then, he was a bit like, you know, Fawlty Towers, that English comedy series with John Cleese. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yes.
With Basil Fawlty. So my ex was very much like Basil Fawlty. So it would have been disastrous had we any guests. We never had any guests. And we just lived there. And I just set up my PR company again. And I employed a couple of people, and he became a stay-at-home dad. And that was grand. That was grand until about 2008. And then we hit the recession here in Ireland. We had a big crunch here because we had the Celtic Tiger immediately prior to that. And then so we didn't have a soft landing. We had a really hard crash.
Okay. And
I also hit divorce at the same time. Not good planning on my part. Don't get divorced in a recession.
Right. My life, different part of the world, but exact same thing happened. For me, mine was 2009, where suddenly recession hit, and I also went through a divorce. So
it's a terrible thing to do at the same time, isn't it? Because everything's out the window.
It is. It completely went out the window. So I think you and I have a similar follow-up where you lost your house. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So same thing with me. Lost your house and had to deal with that, the fallout from all of that. So
bailiffs and ugh.
Yeah. So yours was a little more dramatic. Do you mind talking a little bit about what your experience was?
It was by accident. I ended up living my personal drama in a very public way, which wasn't on purpose, because my ex went back to the UK. We were going through a very painful divorce. He went back to the UK and he became bankrupt. And by default, he gave all the debt to myself and our 2 children. So I'm there trying to pay the mortgage and then run my business. But we were hitting a recession, plus a very, very difficult divorce, as I say, that was using up a lot of headspace. Yeah. So we'd moved out. My kids had ponies. I promised my children, in the good days, you'll always have your ponies. I should have said you'll always have your hockey sticks, not ponies. Oh my God, what did disastrous move. Right. But so I thought I was doing the right thing because I wanted them to have stability, and little girls love their ponies anyway. So anyway, we moved out of the big house because I couldn't afford we had horses in livery, couldn't afford that. So we moved to a little cottage. Well, actually, we chose this beautiful paddocks and stables that had a little cottage attached to it. So we moved into there and rent out the house. And then the drug squad evicted my tenants from the house. So I had this big house. It was a bit wrecked because they were growing weed all over the place. I couldn't rent it again. So I made a video to sell it. And it was a quirky video. And it went viral. And I went a bit viral then because what happened was, I think I just became the sort of the poster girl for austerity in Ireland, if you like, in 2009, 2010. And it was a perfect little story because there I was, divorcee with her 2 kids, and the dastardly ex-husband, had run off and left us, if you like, with all the money, the debt and everything. And, the banks came. I made this video and it went viral. And I went a bit viral because also at the same time, the banks here in Ireland, I don't know what they were doing in the US, they were doing this narrative that people were gaming the system and there was all this shame involved. And if you failed financially here in Ireland, it was seen as a bad character. They were somehow dishonest, whatever. And so people were committing suicide left, right and centre because the crash here happened so hard, and maybe they'd lost their job, maybe they had divorce, maybe they had ill health. But everybody knew people who took their own lives because of the shame that was being foisted on them by the banks. Yeah. So I got quite angry, and I sort of, and the video I made to sell the house, it went viral. So all of a sudden people were talking to me about what it felt like, and I was in front of cameras the whole time, in front of radio, and I'm sort of saying, it hurts a lot, it really does hurt a lot, but, I made the money, it was my money to lose, if you like, and plus also, I did nothing wrong, I didn't cheat or lie or fraud or any of those things, everything collapsed, and so I got a cash offer from someone to buy the house, and it was for €500,000, but the mortgage at that stage was €800,000, and so the banks refused to consent to sell. They preferred to repossess the home, and then they sold it the following year for $165,000. That made no sense. And in the middle of all that, I became, as I said, very activated and very angry against this narrative. And so when the house was taken from me, I had this large debt. I had to go bankrupt. So I was the first female bankrupt under the new laws. And then because I'd been ranting and raving against the banks and about parity of risk and about their responsibility, and I don't know if you know or not, but the Irish government bailed out the banks with the public purse. So that was it made no sense that was happening here. And then because I was the first female bankrupt under the new laws, because I was bankrupt, I wasn't allowed to run for public office. So I took the Irish government to the High Court and then onto the Supreme Court, arguing that my constitutional rights were being infringed and I should be allowed to run for public office. And I succeeded. Woo! So,
hey, congratulations.
I changed the law, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then I had to run then, and the next elections were the 2014 European Parliamentary elections. So I ran in Ireland South, and I had a great time. It was a lot of fun. I had no money. I hadn't got. I was an independent. I was sort of, but I got 11,500 votes. So 11,500 people believed me, and and it was a good thing too as well, because I was so public about my own personal financial meltdown. I mean, and I was deliberately, I wasn't like going, poor me, I'm going, this hurts, but I'm not, a criminal or anything like that.
Yeah.
I helped a lot of other people who were feeling really bad, who were being shamed because of the financial failure. So I know I helped a lot of people, and that was how I took the horrible stuff and made a positive out of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Fantastic.
Yes.
That's really good. So, and I know at the same time you've been doing this, like you started a blog and you've written a few books about, how public you were about, your debt and what it was like. But simultaneously, it looks like you, in addition to writing about debt and what's happening in your life, you also got into the genre of writing erotica. How did that story happen, and where do those connect in some kind of way?
Okay, well, what happened was there's two things were happening, maybe three things even. One was, of course, the 50 Shades was huge around that time, and anybody who was a writer said, I could write better than that, because I mean the 50 Shades, it's fan fiction for Twilight, and I just hate. I read 1.5 of the books, could not read anymore, hated them. Yeah. So I said I could write better, and then I thought, wow, if I'm successful, maybe I could save my house. So I thought, I had all these things going on. And then thirdly, you know how I said I became the public face of austerity in Ireland? There were loads of documentaries which I featured in. It's kind of crazy because I seem to sum up what was happening. And I had lots of overseas production companies. I was on Al Jazeera and Russia Today and BBC Two. Yeah. And at one stage I had just started writing the books, thinking, I'll save my house. I'll sell millions of them and I'll save my house. And but in the middle of it all, a French and a German documentary makers approached me to appear in one of their documentaries. They were going to start with Japan and the ASEAN tiger that crashed, and go right the way through to Ireland, and we'd exited the bailout and where we all right and austerity worked. And I said, excuse me, austerity doesn't work. The banks have been bailed out by the public purse. It's wrong. Anyway, I didn't fit either of their narratives, so they dropped me from the documentaries. I didn't care because I was never paid for it. I just did it because I thought I should rant and rave because of what was happening I thought was wrong. But then I got a bit angry. So what I did was, I was writing erotica. I was thinking to save the house, and I was thinking of writing loads of sex. But then I put all my activism into my books. So if you want to understand what happened in Ireland in the post-Celtic Tiger, you read my books. And it'll explain what was happening, what people were feeling. There's bad banks, there's bad solicitors, there's bad, all this sort of financial failure going on. And of course, because it's erotica, it has a happy ending. You have to have a happy ending. You can't have a depressive erotica book.
Of course not. Yes. Well, wonderful.
But I didn't sell enough books though to save my house.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know. Except what I'm doing now is about 2 years ago, and this is how we connected, is I discovered blockchain. Right.
I went. You jumped me ahead of my next question. So
sorry.
No, this which leads us to a good leeway. So why did you get into blockchain, and how has that been so far?
Well, I did a lot of activism stuff, right? I was a bit kind of burnt out at the end of it all. It was very enjoyable doing the political run. And then I tried to get to work, and I couldn't get any work because I was a certain age. I just turned 50. I was a woman. I'd been self-employed. I couldn't even get job interviews. So I was getting very, very frustrated. And then I went off and I did a master's in screenwriting, which is good for my self-confidence. That was kind of cool. But then I still couldn't get work. I'm going, what am I going to do now? I thought my life was kind of over. I thought that's it. And then I'd been working on a project